Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Kraus, and this is our Unit 2, Part 2 notes on the properties of water. We have to ask ourselves, why do we study water in biology class? And that's because you have trillions of cells, and about 2/3 of the mass of each of those cells is water. A lot of the reactions that are vital to your body, like cell respiration, for example, have to happen in water solutions within cells. And solutions are just mixtures of water and dissolved substances like salts and sugars. So the water molecule contains 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen atom, and that's why it has the formula H2O. The most basic property of a water molecule is that it's a polar molecule. What that means is it has positive and negative ends or poles. In this case, the hydrogen end is slightly positive and the oxygen end is slightly negative. So just like the Earth has north and south poles, a polar molecule has positive and negative poles. Okay. We also have to ask, why is the water molecule polar? And that's because notice that we have covalent bonds between each of the hydrogen atoms and the oxygen atom. We can tell that from this picture because it looks like the hydrogen and oxygen are sharing an electron pair. When sharing of electrons is occurring, that's a covalent bond. So we see that here between this hydrogen and the oxygen, and we see that here between the hydrogen and oxygen as well. So water is held together by 2 covalent bonds. Now if I look at the oxygen atom, its nucleus tells me that it has 8 protons, whereas hydrogen, its nucleus only has 1 proton. What that does is it causes oxygen, which has a stronger positive charge, to hold the shared electrons that they have in the bond more tightly to itself. So again, because oxygen has such a positive charge within its nucleus, it is going to hold the electrons within the covalent bonds more tightly to itself. That's going to result in oxygen gaining a slight negative charge because it's holding those negatively charged electrons very closely to itself. And since hydrogen is kind of losing those shared electrons to oxygen, it ends up with a slight positive charge. If you're losing a negative charge, that means you're gaining a positive charge. Again, because oxygen has such a strong positive charge in its nucleus, it pulls the electrons within these covalent bonds tighter to itself and gets a partial negative charge, leaving the hydrogens with a partial or slight positive charge. This little S symbol that you see in front of the charges just means slight or partial. And let's go full screen. Okay, so again, you can see the slight negative charge on oxygen, the slight positive charges on hydrogen. Okay. And you can see that as well in this picture. We see the shared electrons. Note this one was coming from hydrogen. This one was from oxygen. We can tell that from the color difference. Both of those shared electrons are being pulled towards oxygen's nucleus because it has more protons. As those electrons get pulled towards oxygen, it gains a slight or partial negative charge, and our hydrogens end up with a slight or partial positive charge. Now, because each water molecule has a slightly negative oxygen end and slightly positive hydrogen ends, we end up with water molecules that come close to one another, forming something called a hydrogen bond. Hydrogen bonds form between the hydrogen end of one water molecule and the oxygen end of another because their opposite charges attract. These hydrogen bonds are weaker than the covalent bonds that occur within the water molecule, and they're also weaker than ionic bonds. Notice that in this picture, one water molecule is able to form 4 hydrogen bonds with other water molecules. And again, up to 4 hydrogen bonds. Now, because water molecules are polar and are able to form hydrogen bonds with each other, they demonstrate a property called cohesion. What cohesion means is molecules that are alike or identical to each other sticking together, in this case, water. So what we see as a result of cohesion is water molecules that are found on the surface of a lake or pond tend to attract to one another through cohesion, and that forms a film on the surface of the lake or pond, and that film is going to resist the force of an object on top of it. We see this on the surface of lakes or ponds, and water strider insects are able to make use of this little film, which we call surface tension, by spreading their weight out so that they don't fall through into the water. So again, cohesion between water molecules creates this film or surface tension that resists changes in pressure, and our water strider insect is able to make use of that to walk on water. Cohesion between water molecules is also why if you dropped water on a surface, like let's say our lab tables, it would form a bead because the water molecules want to stay close together. And this is my lovely picture of surface tension. So we see our water molecules being held together by hydrogen bonds. That represents cohesion between the water molecules because they're attracted to each other. And cohesion causes a little film to form on the surface of this pond that resists changes in pressure. Another property of water is that it is adhesive. What that means is it's able to stick to other polar molecules or other charged molecules. For example, if you were to put water into a graduated cylinder, the graduated cylinder could be glass, it could be plastic, but the water molecules are attracted to the glass or the plastic on the sides of the tube. So because those water molecules on the sides of the tube are attracted to it, it's going to pull up the edges of the water a little bit so that they are higher than the water at the center of the tube. We call that little dip at the center of the tube the meniscus. And again, that forms due to adhesion between water molecules and the sides of the tube. Again, adhesion is when two things that are not alike, like water and glass, stick together. So again, cohesion causes water bubbles to form, and an example of adhesion occurs when water soaks into a paper towel. Water is attracted to the fibers of the paper towel. Water can also go through capillary action. Capillary action is when water flows up a narrow tube against gravity. So we see this with these flowers right here, which were originally white. We cut the stems and we put them into different colored dyes. Water is going to travel up the stems by capillary action, and it's going to cause the flowers to turn the color of the dye. Pretty cool. So what's actually happening inside the stem? Well, there's adhesion between water molecules and the inside of the stem, which is going to pull the water molecules closest to the sides of the stem up. Then those water molecules closest to the sides of the tube or stem are going to be attracted through cohesion to the water molecules in the middle. As a result, there's an overall upward movement of all the water due to adhesion and cohesion. So adhesion is going to be the force that will help pull the water molecules on the sides up, and they'll pull their neighbors up through cohesion. The combination of cohesion and adhesion results in capillary action when it occurs in a narrow tube. Okay. And this is just showing capillary action within a tree. This could be one of the diagrams that you choose to draw. So this is the tubes inside the tree. Would be much skinnier, but I wanted you to be able to see it. So we've got adhesion between the water molecules and the sides of the stem, and cohesion between the water molecules on the sides and the ones in the middle. So we see an overall upward movement of the water. Water is also considered an excellent solvent. What is a solvent? Well, water is often found as part of a mixture called a solution. A solution is when one substance, the solute, dissolves into another substance, the solvent. Water is called the universal solvent because it's really good at dissolving a variety of solutes like salt, which is sodium chloride, or sugar. Okay. For example, lemonade powder is mostly sugar. Mix it up, it dissolves. What this picture is showing is how water can break apart the sodium and the chlorine within salt, sodium chloride, and because it's breaking apart those components, it's causing the salt to dissolve. Something I use to remember that a solution, the definitions of solute and solvent is the solute is typically using the solvent to dissolve. So again, the solute is typically using the solvent to dissolve. Okay. And this is showing in more detail how water is used to break apart something like sodium chloride and dissolve it. Notice that when we put table salt in water, we see this happening. That's because the partial negative charges on the oxygen atoms of our water molecules are attracted to the positively charged sodium ion. The partially positive hydrogen atoms are going to be attracted to the negative chlorine ion. So we end up with a situation where sodium and chlorine are isolated from each other because water molecules are going to cluster around them. Okay. Another property of water is that it has a neutral pH. A pH is going to tell you how acidic or basic a solution is. The scale ranges from 0 to 14, and if your pH is 7, that's neutral. If the pH is lower than 7, it's acidic. Some examples of acidic substances are Coca-Cola, any type of citrus like orange juice. And then if your pH is above 7, it's basic. Examples of that might be baking soda. Okay. All right, how are acids and bases different from each other? Well, acids are going to form hydrogen ions in water, and again, their pH is less than 7, whereas bases are going to release hydroxide ions, or OH minus, in water, and their pH is greater than 7. So again, acids let off hydrogen ions, or H plus, in water, and bases let off hydroxide ions, or OH minus, in water. Now, the pH within a cell is super important because it determines what types of reactions can happen in your cell. We actually have substances called buffers in our cell that are really helpful because they are able to mitigate any changes in pH and keep your cell within a comfortable pH range. They're actually weak acids and bases themselves that can react with a strong acid or base that your cell comes into contact with. Like, let's say, God forbid, you drank some battery acid. Oh my God. The buffers in your body would go to work very quickly to try to make adjustments and bring the pH back to normal. Okay? The reason we want to keep pH within a very comfortable range in your cells, usually right around 7, because your cells are mostly water, is because a drastic change in pH could alter the shape of molecules in your body, like proteins and DNA, so they can't do their jobs. That could cause cell death. It's not a good situation. So buffers are there to help prevent major fluctuations in pH. Okay, this is the end of our first video of 2 on water properties.